Okay, everybody, live on tape from a secret, undisclosed location deep in the heart of downtown St. John's, Newfoundland, home of the former home of the Ice Caps, lies a hidden sanctuary from which we broadcast this little show of ours called In the Library of Graphic Literature. I'm your happy host, Wallace, and got a good few things to look at here tonight. What shall we start with? I've got a couple of omnibuses actually that are pretty cool, and one other hardcover to have a look at. So let's get right to it. It was actually a good week. I got a few other books and all that, but I figured I'd focus really on these three. First up, once again, another entry here from the Library of American Comics and Hermes Press is Starhawks. Check this out. It's from Ron Goulart and Gil Kane. Gil Kane has always been one of my all-time favorite artists. He has probably some of the best anatomy, some of the best visual flow of any artist that I can remember growing up. His comic covers for DC and especially Marvel in the 70s, it seemed that every second cover in the 1970s from Marvel was a Gil Kane cover. Even though he really came to fame from doing Green Lantern and other things for DC in the 60s. But Kane, he's from the very, very first moment. I think maybe the early Captain Marvels were some of the. Well, I guess beyond the early Green Lanterns, Captain Marvel was where I really fell in love with Gil Kane, because I was a huge Captain Marvel fan growing up, and his version, especially when they switched with the new costume and all that, I always loved. So once again, Library of American Comics. Good work, nice reproduction, and what is it, one more volume I think with this? Anyway, a classic. Now what do we have next? Oh, actually, now we get to do a bit of unwrapping. And we're going to start actually tonight with Classic X-Men. Check it out, check it out. All ready to be unwrapped here. Once again, take your knife, carefully slice open a bit, tear open the rest, pull it open this way. I like to take it up. I like to tear it apart in sections here like this. And here at last, I'll clean that up later. Okay, so here we go. X-Men Classic. Let's have a look. Taking off the dust jacket here. Cool dust jacket there. Too bad they don't have the photos of the covers that this comes from, but hey, still pretty cool. So, one thing that I was curious about, and actually debated with my friend and fellow omnibus collector Dennis Osborne out there, was just the page length of this, because it was supposed to be from X-Men Classic 1 to 44, and he'd done this time. He'd sort of worked up the figures and all that, and he said to me, "Jesus, this just can't be. There's something wrong here." He said it says 1,000 pages or whatever, and he said there wasn't enough really to, considering that it only ran 44 issues, wasn't enough to fill up a book this size. But as I look through it here now, it appears to be so. Oh well. Anyway, for any X-Men fan, this is fabulous. This is what introduced a lot of people to to the X-Men who'd missed it, because the front was they would run classic X-Men from the new X-Men, and they'd have an additional tale thrown in, usually having to do with something around the same time or whatever. So they're all pretty cool looking stories there. All kinds of artists. So sort of a great mixed bag here. I mean, I am an X-Men fan, I guess, more of an early X-Men fan, and more from the 60s and the 70s and around this period, so that of the X-Men classics and all that. So it's kind of neat to see a little bit of a addition to the whole mythos here. But yeah, so I mean, let's see here. Backup stories, new pages added. That must be it. Plus excerpted material. Okay. Dave Cocker. Okay. So okay, they mixed it a bit. But art from the likes of John Bolton, June Brigman, Mark Bright, Rick Leonardi, Kyle Baker, Jim Lee, Jim Fern, Michael Collins, Kieran Dwyer, David Ross, and other people: Tom Morgan, Jim Sherman, James Fry, John Romita Sr., Bob Layton, Chuck Patton, Kieran Dwyer, Dave Cockerman, John Byrne on all the other things. So so I can see how they kind of stretched out, because there's a lot of pages too, like that. Okay, so that answers that question. So I know the folks in the oh, here, one more quick look. The Omnibus Cafe wanted to have a look at this. So there's another quick look-see there anyway. So now put it back, and it's a dust jacket. I do this very carefully because I don't like to damage the dust jacket. As a matter of fact, it drives me crazy if I get like a mark in it or anything like that. Okay, now, last but certainly not least tonight, this is the biggie, and I mean this seriously. This is one of the all-time classics, I think, of comics, of DC Comics, Jack Kirby's Fourth World. To me, the Fourth World holds a very special place in my heart, because I can remember buying, I think it was one of the copy of New Gods. I think it was number 4 with the Orion Gang in it. When I was a kid, waiting on a ferry in North Sydney, Nova Scotia, to take me back home to the island of Newfoundland. And I went out to some nearby set of shops and I bought some comics to read, and that was one of them. And I remember years later, and then went back and got a lot of the other ones. But in my mind, the Fourth World was like the pinnacle of superhero comics to me. It was as good or as great as I thought superhero comics would ever get. And of course, it's Jack Kirby, and hey, the guy was a master. So let's gently pop this open. The one thing you got to say about Kirby too, with the Fourth World, was that he took Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, a very boring title as it was, and he turned it into something spectacular. There's never been, I think, a Jimmy Olsen as good as Kirby's Jimmy Olsen. It was wildly imaginative. It was introducing at the time themes like DNA and cloning, which, even though today may seem fairly commonplace, whatever, back then it was groundbreaking and new stuff, and so he was well ahead of his time. The first real one I can remember buying out of these in terms of the number ones, I do remember buying Mr. Miracle #1 as a kid and reading it and thinking it was super cool. It was just Mr. Miracle with his weird suit design and all that just seemed so different from everything else I'd seen at that point. then with the New Gods, when I started to buy back issues, and I bought back, and I was able to get some of the older New Gods and all that, especially everything from 1 and 2, some of the earlier issues. I can remember reading it, just falling in love with it. It was just so odd. I love the design of Orion and his astral harness. To me, something about that it was absolutely amazing. Just the idea of it, it was just, Kirby's imagination just went so deep. And he pulled up so many different things that I just wonder how you can come up with. So let's have a look at this. We'll take off the outer wrapping here. Well, let's examine it first. So there, Barda. I was always in love with Barda, and one of the cool drawings of Darkseid. Darkseid has to be, in my mind, DC's premier villain. He's their Darth Vader. He's their Doctor Doom. And this thing weighs a bloody ton. Also, the cover is from the inside front cover. Well, it's page 1, 2, 3, or 4 of New Gods #1. This, I think, is what's on one of the other volumes of. It's up there, the Jack Kirby Omnibus that was released in 4 volumes. This was something like the cover, except it didn't have the drawing of Jack Kirby there. So let's have a look here. Oh, black inside. Oh, Metron. Metron too, I can remember coming across him. It was just like, my God, a guy who sits in this cosmic chair, roaming the universe, checking out all kinds of stuff. And the great thing is, the first issue of the Fourth World 2, for most historians, there it is there. The new Jimmy Olsen, number 133. That, for a lot of people, is what actually starts the Bronze Age, at least in my mind, anyway. But I mean, the way he took Jimmy Olsen from just being some dull cub reporter who, when he got into trouble, he'd beep on his beeper and he'd have Superman come and haul his ass out of the fire. It just got, even as a kid, it got old so fast. So when I came upon the Kirby Jimmy Olsen, I absolutely fell in love with it right from the start. Loved the DNA project, all the clones, the Evil Factory. Kirby had a thing with cool names. The Boom Tube, which was a form of transportation where basically you could summon a teleportation tube that would take you anywhere that your mind wanted to go. Well, in concert with these little computers they all had called mother boxes, which was really cool, I thought. So anyway, let's. This thing is going to be hard to hold, so I'm just going to flip through it here, just so you can get a. Oh yeah, I love that. I mean, each issue was just wildly imagined. The Glory Boat, one of my favorites. A classic of Kirby's. There's a bit more of that. Brigadoon. I do believe that's where they found the Evil Factory. There it is. And the Whiz Wagon, as they called it. Just absolutely amazing. And one of the best stories in the whole thing, The Pact. This, to me, is that and Hyman, I think, are some of Kirby's best work. Look at this. Dig that. But unfortunately, Kirby... Oh, there it is, Hyman. That's still one of my other favorite Kirby stories. Unfortunately, the New Gods and Jimmy Olsen and all of them were cancelled, and the only one left standing was Mr. Miracle. And he too eventually fell, and that ended the Fourth World. Now Kirby came back in the 80s and 90s. In the I think it was the 90s. He did a sort of a finish to it called The Hunger Dogs, and it was kind of unfortunate because I think it was around the time that I think Kirby's vision must have been failing him, because you're going to notice a flattening in his drawing and stuff like that. But but still, it's kind of an interesting ending all the same. But overall, and it's funny because I was debating with a friend of mine, Paul Moorhead, talking about the Fourth World and all that, and even with all its really strange dialogue and all that, there's just something about the Fourth World that just reaches out and screams at me. To me, it's one of the most powerful, I guess, one of the most powerful graphic novels, really, in some ways, out there. And I truly think it is Kirby's masterpiece, his own personal masterpiece. I guess between this and Kamandi. But Fourth World, overall, my favorite. And as a matter of fact, it's so much my favorite that I did double dip in buying this, because it just looks so cool. I just had to have it. Well, I guess that's really just about it now. I seem to have run out of things to talk about. Nothing there in my reading pile here that I could talk about. Oh. Well, just one thing here. Ragnarok from Walt Simonson. If you're a Thor fan, or if you're a Walt Simonson fan, check out Ragnarok. It's Thor on steroids. And that's from the Reading Stack. Okay, folks, well, I guess it's time to bid you all farewell, and happy reading this week. Whether you buy a comic, a trade paperback, or a hardcover, I don't care. Just buy something and give it a read. Oh yeah, one more acquisition. I got one of these super cool things. Unfortunately, came from when one of our local used bookstores afterwards closed recently, and they sold off a lot of their stuff and all that. And that was a step I can remember stepping on that many a time, to reach up to get books and stuff like that. I figured, hey, I'll buy that and bring it home and put it in the library here. So, that's it for this week. Keep on reading. See you next week. Next week we'll be doing... I'll keep it a surprise. Okay, bye!